Welcome to Contributor Experience. We are one of the 23 special interest groups in Kubernetes. In this talk, we're going to go over who we are, what we do, and how we do it. I'm Jorge Castro, a community manager at VMware.
And I'm Bob Killen, a research cloud administrator at the University of Michigan.
Before we get started, the Kubernetes community is massive. We have over 48,000 drive-by contributors. That's how we classify people who have submitted issues or PRs or fixes to Kubernetes. And out of those, we have about almost 1,200 org members, which we consider to be core developers who are larger contributors to the project. We manage about 209 repositories in GitHub and have processed almost 167,000 pull requests and have a healthy community of 100,000 users in our Slack. That should give you an understanding of who we are. Kubernetes is divided into 23 SIGs, 11 working groups, 3 committees, and 2 user groups. We're a diverse SIG with a lot of different people with different backgrounds, work at different companies, and different interests. We tend to be the meta SIG for the project. If you consider Kubernetes as a large network of interconnected groups, we tend to be the grand central station where SIGs can collaborate around making things better for themselves and for new contributors. If you have no idea where to contribute, then we'd be honored to be your first SIG. It's not uncommon for people to hang out with us while they understand and figure out how the project works, and then move on to whatever specialized SIG interests them more. Remember, Kubernetes is an operating system. People love to play with networking for a while. They want to learn how storage works, and they maybe dip their toes in the APIs. There's no wrong way to do it, and there's never a shortage of work in any area of Kubernetes. So for us, finding a place for you makes us happy. So you've met myself and Bob. SIGs have co-chairs and tech leads who are facilitators of the SIG. Our job is to keep the ball rolling and ensuring people are empowered to do the things that they want to do. It's also a ton of fun. Bob and I are your co-chairs, and Nikita Raghunath and Christoph Blecker are our technical leads. We've been selected to represent the SIG as your chairs and tech leads. We follow in the footsteps of the great leads of the past, like Paris Pittman, Elsie Phillips, and Garrett Rodriguez. Let's talk about teams. Kubernetes is huge. Dividing and conquering is really the only reasonable way to accomplish a large amount of work at the same time. So we tend to be divided into teams and subprojects, which we'll get to in a little bit. Our teams are, we have an events team, we have a marketing team, we have a GitHub administration team, we have a stream team, which handles our YouTube work, we have a team of moderators, and an entire team of people who handle the Asia Pacific time zone, and community managers, which is our team that is basically, if you're not in a team, you're in the community manager team, and that's just what we call ourselves. So what do we do? You might have seen our work doing your first pull request to Kubernetes. At any given time, we have 1,000 or so open pull requests. So we depend on automation to help put those PRs in front of the right eyeballs. Doing that requires assembling processes for us to follow on how to do exactly that. That's just one example of a process that we work on. We usually have one of these processes for every part of the contribution process. Things like, when should we expire abandoned GitHub issues, to what's the best way to onboard a new person, to what kind of labels should the project use. We do this for consistency reasons, so contributing to SIG networking should feel familiar to you if you've contributed to SIG storage, for example. So we strive to get contributors a consistent experience across the project, while at the same time providing services to these other SIGs to make their lives easier. So first things first, we have a nice large list for you of every SIG here at this link. This lists the SIG, the co-chair, their Slack channel, their mailing list, and more importantly, their meetings and their meeting notes. All SIG meetings are public and have a public notes document. This is a great way to browse on what you want to do. So if you start at this page, click around, see what interests you, and then you can dig a little bit deeper into each one of these SIGs. We also publish a community calendar, which has all of those SIG meetings and other project meetings in one place. We recommend subscribing to the calendar so that you can see what's going on in the community. Also, if you subscribe to that SIG's mailing list, you will automatically get a meeting invite to that SIG's public meeting. Note that we're working on a contributor site, so these URLs will become much more friendlier and easier to remember, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. How we do it is via subprojects. So what we do is we take everything that the SIG owns and then we divide it into conquerable areas that we apply a team to a subproject. We're going to talk about the community subproject, which kind of owns and manages the overall community repo. We will talk about the community management subproject, which manages the operations and policy for a lot of the things that we do here. Contributor documentation is the home for things our contributor and developer guides and our contributor website. We will be covering DevStats, which is our set of Grafana dashboards that tries to gather all the metrics around contribution so we can figure out things like PR velocity, average mean time between a PR and merge, and we can figure out who's contributing where. And that gives us the data and information that we need to make better policy decisions and to figure out where we can improve as a project. Events. So these mostly are physical events. Some of you might have attended a contributor summit. We will be talking about events and their effects going forward, especially in this calendar year. We have an entire subproject dedicated to GitHub Management. So the Kubernetes code base does all live on GitHub, and there's an entire subproject who manages that, and Bob will be getting into those details. Kates.io is our homepage, and it's the home of the Kubernetes Infrastructure Working Group. In this video playlist, there should be a status, and we will briefly talk about some of the things that we do there. Mentoring, of course, as a huge project, the best way to get things done is through mentorship, either group mentorship or one-to-one mentorship. There's no guide or anything that we can write that's better than people helping themselves out to understand and figure out how things work. So we have an entire sub-project to that, and we will be dedicating some time to tell you how that works. And then lastly, keeping a Slack infrastructure healthy is difficult, especially with such a large group. So we're going to cover some of the tools and policies that we've put in place to make that fun. So first, community management. Mailing lists and calendars fall under this. All of our mailing lists are hosted on Google Groups. And as I've been mentioning, all these SIGs have a public mailing list and meetings. It's not uncommon for SIGs to publish their meeting notes regularly on their mailing list. It's usually the first place where you want to ask a question or interact with members of the community. So we host these as a project in one place. For us as SIG contributor experience, we do maintain these and kind of do the infrastructure plumbing background. So hopefully your interaction with mailing lists is just as a user. And we've currently made some progress in these areas to make this less painful and easier to manage for those of you that are using multiple mailing lists. So all you really need to do is join the mailing lists and figure out how to organize the mail in whatever email service you use. youtube.com/Kubernetes community is the home to all of our YouTube videos. Not only will you find all the SIG meeting Zoom recordings in there, but you will also find some top level meetings that we do host in there. So for example, we have a monthly community meeting that covers all aspects of the project. We have instructional videos. We have code walkthroughs of certain areas of the code base. The release team, after every release, does an entire post-mortem of the release process that gets recorded and put in there. So if you subscribe to this, you will be getting weekly updates of things that are happening all over the Kubernetes community. And it's an excellent resource if you want to catch up on the long tail of things like that. This subproject is managed by the stream team, and we're always looking for more members. We do have these meetings, and sometimes we have special events and things like that, and those are recorded and put on YouTube, and that's done by a set of volunteers. So we try to, as a global project, to cover all sorts of time zones. So when we do have live streaming events that cover, for example, Europe and the East Coast of the US, we'd love to bring that kind of content also to people who live in the West Coast or Asia Pacific. So in order to do that, if you've got OBS skills, or you know how to manage YouTube channels, or you're a video editor perhaps, or you know how to make pretty looking slide intros for people's videos, we could always use skills like that. So please let us know if you're interested in something like that. The community management subproject, one of its main tasks is owning stuff. GitHub.com/Kubernetes/Kubernetes is where Kubernetes, the software itself, lives. GitHub.com/Kubernetes/community is the community repo. Here you will find things like our governance documentation, election procedures, our values, our code of conduct, and any kind of the projects that are happening around the project tend to live in the community repo, and that is owned by this sub-project. Zoom, there's a lot of things that this SIG does for Zoom as far as managing the licenses that we need so that SIG chairs can run their meetings and record them and all sorts of stuff. As an end user or contributor, you generally don't need to deal with any of this. But if you do know how to administer these tools, like I said, we always could use some help. However, you can help us out by ensuring that the Zoom client on your computer is up to date. They are constantly adding new features, especially around moderation, that we are always using and consuming, and it never hurts to keep up with your security updates. So keep your clients up to date. Discuss.kubernetes.io is our discourse-powered community forums. It's a more user web-friendly way to have discussions if you're not interested in developer mailing lists. So we kind of run this for our end users. You will find developers there. You will find people who might have the same interests, the same questions. And it's just a nice long, huge forum full of information, everything from kubectl tips and tricks to, hey, everybody, check out this cool post that I saw about Kubernetes. So it's a great way to spin up on Kubernetes information. Moderators. Each of these tools and properties that we use, whether that's Zoom, YouTube, Slack, Discourse, all need moderators. We do have a code of conduct that needs to be enforced. We do expect when someone comes to one of our properties that they will have a wonderful, friendly user experience. And for that, we depend on a large group of moderators across almost every time zone in the world to make sure that we're just keeping things nice and clean. We are always looking for more moderators, especially if you're in the Asia Pacific time zone, to help give us that global coverage that we need. Upstream marketing used to be part of community management. However, thanks to people like Matt Broberg, this is a great example of a project that started out small and is well on its way of becoming its own sub-project. This project was initially started by Paris Pittman, and then is an example on how we hand projects off to people as they onboard into Kubernetes and tell us what they're interested in, and then just find something that they're passionate about, and then just take it over. So this team was established late last year. They've set up an entire communication framework. We've got a new Twitter account that will just have information and news specifically for contributors to allow us to give users more information in a place that's consistent so they can find out what's going on and not depend on slides like this all the time to figure out what's going on in the project. There's plenty of things to do here in this team. And before I hand it off to Bob, just a reminder, a lot of these teams that you see, the people that are volunteering and working here, you do not need to be a developer or a programmer. We always need project management help, any kind of social experience you might have, and just, be passionate about something. There's always things that we need help with. And if we can't find a thing that you can help us out, we'll always work to find a place for you. And with that, we'll move on to documentation.
Well, it's my turn to take over. So I want to dive right into our documentation. It is sort of a living set of documents. And with that, it's sort of is broken down into two broad areas. The contributor guide, this is something everyone should be familiar with, whether you are helping write documentation, running issue triage sessions, or more. It's sort of the base level of knowledge to be effective in our community. Next is the developer guide. This focuses more specifically on developing Kubernetes, things like Golang best practices, how to write tests, API best practices, and much more. This is currently also undergoing a significant rework with the help of Joel Barker and Eric Aronson, two tech writers that are helping us sort of with our information architecture and sort of restructuring the documentation to be much more helpful. Sorry. On both of these things, we're always also looking for more help with revising them, especially new contributors who can approach them with sort of the beginner's mind. There's always details that we as more experienced contributors overlook, and these little things will help many others going forward. Lastly, we have our contributor site. This we really want to publish soon. Hopefully by the time this is actually live, the site will be live. But the sort of the idea behind it is that our documentation in GitHub is not very discoverable. And having a single website you could go to for things like the contributor guide, the developer guide, or calendar, and some other resources would be extremely valuable. And as well as helping with our general information discoverability problems. The next project or subproject is DevStats. As George mentioned earlier, this is sort of a tool to help visualize our GitHub activity. It uses the GitHub archives to sort of crunch a bunch of data and calculate various things on GitHub events. And this can give us things like PR velocity, how many and who is contributing. It's where we get some of our numbers for the first slide that we had in this deck. So like the number of contributors. Now, historically, it has been actually super useful for our community groups, like our SIGs and working groups. But one of our contributors, Lori Apple, has been spearheading an effort to build some better dashboards that we can use, especially when it comes to trying to find some like good community health metrics. And if sifting through data is your thing, this might be of interest. And if you're interested in it, please feel free to reach out in Slack. Next is events. Now, events have been hit hard this year. We regularly host 3 contributor summits a year alongside KubeCon, and each one has its own event team sort of modeled off our release team with their shadow program. It's been one of our more successful means we've had for onboarding new contributors. These events are always a great opportunity for contributors to get like FaceTime with each other. We also have social activities. There's lots of content to help contributors sort of level up with regard to things like writing tests, hunting flakes, or how to write a better API. We might wind up doing a virtual event for KubeCon North America later this year, but it's still sort of to be determined. If you are interested in that sort of thing, please subscribe to the Kubernetes Dev mailing list, and all communications regarding that will be sent out to that. The other big thing that our events team handles is the elections for our steering committee. So our steering committee elections happen once a year, and members that are appointed to the steering committee are elected for a 2-year term, and they sort of set the policy for some of the project and steer it. And then we as contributor experience are sort of the executors of the policy. The next project is sort of near and dear to my heart, and that is GitHub Management. This subproject, along with the GitHub admin team, manage how contributors interact with GitHub, along with becoming an org member, as well as creating and managing repos. And some of the more recent stuff we've been working on has been sort of defining the member lifecycle policy. So the project is now 6 years old, and people are not expected to be contributing to it forever. But with org membership comes an elevated set of permissions, and being able to use our CI without checks, as well as potentially sign off on code. So we need to think about offboarding as well. One of the other initiatives under the GitHub management project has been to retire one of our older orgs, Kubernetes Incubator. It was an idea several years ago to try out some things and either decide if a project should be accepted in the project or if it should be spun back out on its own. And this process had a whole slew of issues and sort of been replaced by a different process. And at the time of this recording, there are just 2 repos left, and the final decisions on those either being brought into the org or being spun out should be reached by the end of July, making the changes hopefully going in place in August. Lastly, we have an upcoming initiative, and that's to begin to prune some of our repos that have gone inactive. We have 209 repos, and with this project being 6 years old, there are some that were sort of experiments and other ideas that aren't really actively being maintained on anymore, and it just makes sense for them to be archived. And this is sort of it seems like a lot of janitorial work, but it's essential to the project nonetheless. Now, before I jump right into our next subproject, mentoring, there is a little bit of a prerequisite that I want to just sort of get out of the way. So this is known as the ladder, and I want to credit this slide to one of our contributors, Guinevere Sanger, who came up with the original version of this. And it sort of covers the process of, as a non-member contributor, you then go on to become a member after you contribute a little bit, and over time you may become more familiar with an area of the code base, and you might start reviewing PRs, and eventually you get PR'd into what we refer to as an owner's file as a reviewer. This means that you'll be sort of the first line of defense when it comes to reviewing PRs as they're coming in. Now, after spending some time as a reviewer, you become a bit more of a subject matter expert in that area of the codebase. You reviewed a bunch of PRs, and you'll get promoted to an approver, which means you can actually sign off and allow that code to be merged. And let's say you start to learn more about other areas and other areas under the SIG. You may become a higher level approver for like an entire subproject. So you might graduate then to like sort of helping set goals and outline the milestones for the entire subproject itself, and potentially eventually become a SIG lead. And this in itself is this whole thing is referred to as the ladder. And now for many, the first big hurdle is making the jump from a non-member to member, but our mentoring initiatives are here to help people climb the ladder itself. And mentorship is just essential to overall project health. I was just talking about contributor lifecycle and offboarding, but mentoring is how we bring on new contributors and help our current contributors grow into the roles and become sub-project owners and future SIG leads. And with that, we have a couple different programs. The first is Meet Our Contributors. It is a 1 hour sort of Ask Me Anything with a panel of current contributors. The audience for this tends to be like 50-50 split between both new and current contributors. And some of our more common questions include like, how do I get started? How can I get my PR reviewed faster? And how do I hunt down a flake? Next, we have our group mentoring cohort, where we are looking to work more with SIGs and sort of build a program targeting active contributors. This is specifically to get more reviewers and improvers in a certain area of the code base. We have an initiative right now with SIG Node, but we're looking to set some up with others. If you are a SIG lead or a subproject owner and you're interested in this sort of thing, please reach out if interested. Next is sort of broad category of shadow programs. And this happens to be one of the best ways to build a path towards a sustainable contributor base, is to build a team with roles. These are often well scoped with a lead and one or more shadows, with the assumption built into the shadow that the shadow will eventually take over the lead, sort of creating this self-sustaining cycle. And this has been used to great effect within both our release team and events teams. Next, we have the one-on-one hour. This is something that actually isn't used too much just because it requires a lot of time, but we try and offer the ability for people to book time and ask questions with a more experienced contributor one-on-one. We also have two major internship programs, working with Google for the Google Summer of Code and the Outreach internship program. I believe both are done for the remainder of the year, but subscribe to the Kubernetes Dev mailing list if you're interested in this sort of thing in the future. Next, we have our new contributor workshop. This has its own slide itself. It happens to be one of our largest mentoring programs, and we've previously held it alongside contributor summits, and it actually used to be under the event's subproject, but it has since moved out and moved under mentoring earlier this year. And this is because hosting it in person had a lot of difficulties. There were a lot of issues with hotel Wi-Fi not working, corporate laptops being locked down, and it just led to a degraded experience. And so moving it to an online-only event where you can sort of make your own curriculum, and it's sort of like the content itself sort of mirrors our contributor guide while diving deeper into areas like local build and testing. And this piecemeal approach means that if you've already got your Go environment set up, you can skip to the sections that are more relevant to you, such as the repo tour. And if you're an experienced contributor, preferably with a good recording setup, we'd love your help tackling some of these sections and recording a good presentation for it. And with that takes us to Slack infra. Slack infra, as we said, we have a Slack workspace with over 100,000 users, and maintaining a safe space for them can pose quite a challenge, and we've sort of had to build our own tooling to help manage it all. Now, Slack itself is not really designed for open communities, and it sort of expects you to be able to go to your HR person if you have an issue with someone. That doesn't really work so well in an open group. And one of our contributors, Catherine Berry, built tooling that lets us manage Slack through Git, as well as added a plugin. So we now have the functionality to report messages, and these things will sort of bubble up to our Slack admin team for review. We also have some upcoming things that we intend to work on, such as automating postings to announcements for things like security announcements, as well as being able to delegate moderation capabilities to channel owners. This is because there are a lot of projects that are hosted within the Kubernetes Slack, and for some they'd like to be able to manage their own community before potentially has to bubble up or escalate to up to us as full Slack admins. Lastly, this is not a subproject, but something that is very important to us, and that is the naming working group. SIG Contribex is one of the sponsors for this new working group. And sort of the idea behind it is to help establish a set of inclusive language and suggestions on how we can update different parts of the project. One of the big things for on the Contribux side, it will be the managing the eventual switch for the Git master branch to something else, likely main at this point. And we are currently working with GitHub and sort of waiting to sort of see what they can do to help us with that migration process. When this is scheduled to occur, you can expect quite a bit of like comms going out to the Kubernetes dev mailing list, as well as on the Twitter and elsewhere.
So how can you contribute? You've heard us talk about how people are onboarding themselves on the contributor ladder and things like that. So no matter what, people are the center of Kubernetes. Yeah, we do make some software that people love and love to use, but for us, the contributor experience is really what we're all about. So for us, it's about our mission to make contributing to Kubernetes easier and ensure that we have a diverse, sustainable contributor base that will keep driving the project forward for years to come. So how do you actually get involved? Getting involved is as easy as attending your very first SIG meeting. Joining a SIG mailing list will usually send you a meeting invite as well for that meeting. So in the beginning, when I showed you that list of SIGs, feel free to just kind of browse around. We have links to all of their archives and then see what interests you. Most SIGs have reserved time for new people to introduce themselves during the meeting. And co-chairs and experienced members of the Kubernetes community are almost always out on the lookout for new people to make them feel welcome. So feel free to join a meeting, introduce yourself, tell us what you're interested in, tell us why you're there. You know, you might be interested in joining to contribute, or maybe there's a thing that you need fixed, for example. So just join the meeting and get involved. And for that, I've assembled some tips here on your very first SIG meeting. The first is always find a buddy. There's a saying that says, if you want to go fast, go by yourself. If you want to go far, go as a group. So for me, initially, when I was getting started in the community, I found a buddy who was able to help me, someone that was at my same level, and we kind of bounced ideas off of each other, or if we got stuck with something, we helped each other out. And I also regularly sought out someone who was more experienced, who could help me out as I was learning. You can either find this among coworkers, if you have coworkers that have worked in Kubernetes before, or you could just find one in a SIG meeting, for example. Volunteering to take notes is a very good way to learn what's going on in Kubernetes very quickly. Usually the co-chairs and tech leads are running the meeting. Whoever is working on the thing that's being discussed on the agenda is usually doing the meeting. And there usually needs to be someone to actually pay attention to take good notes so that we can share those with the mailing list and the rest of the community. So because taking notes forces you to pay attention, you can attend the meeting without being tempted to open a new tab and go do something else. And I found it a really great way to kind of get yourself up to speed on who's who, what they're working on, and what's important to people as you attend the meeting. Attending regularly is also pretty important. Kubernetes releases 4 times a year, usually. Attending regularly, if you miss a month's worth of meetings and it's a weekly meeting, that is a lot of velocity that you've missed out on. So usually I try to attend regularly, especially if it's something that you're really interested in. If there are other parts of the project where you're only mildly interested in, you could just attend meetings on a less regular basis. And always remember that small, dependable contributions is always better than volunteering for the world and not being able to accomplish anything. We've all been there. You've found this great project that really you're into. You're starting to really like the people. You see people that you admire doing so many great things. And then you're going to want to go to every SIG and volunteer for everything. And then you're going to find yourself in the ball of anxiety, wondering why you volunteered for all these things and you just started and now you have no idea where to get started. So you can start contributing. We have people who contributed 1 hour a month and have done so consistently for years. And that is a thing that you can always kind of depend on. So do not bite off more than you can chew. No one's going to yell at you for not volunteering enough. You're the one doing us the favor. So do find something that is easy for you while you figure out what to do. And as you gain experience and figure out and start to meet other people and start to figure out where you're exactly going to fit in the machine, then at that point you can decide to chew on some stuff. SIG should have a list of good first issues. This is a GitHub label. We also use a help wanted label. So usually SIGs have, hey, welcome. Here's a list of good first issues. Feel free to dive in. Since everyone is busy all the time and the project is so busy, some SIGs maintain these lists better than others. If you go to a SIG and they don't have these, or they only have a few things, that is also a great place because you can use your beginner's mind as a new person to kind of help us figure out what things are appropriate for new people and what things aren't. So in some ways, if you don't find what's good for new people to work on, figuring that out, I know it sounds kind of meta, is a great way to contribute. We have plenty of non-code role opportunities like the stream team, Slack administration, but there are many, many things in contributor experience that don't require elevated permissions where we can always use your help. So please don't feel that you need to know Go or Python or be a programmer at all. We have a large group of people who come from program manager backgrounds, and myself, who am not an engineer, I come from a system administrator background. So together with all of these skills that we have, that is how the SIG gets things done. We do it together as opposed to trying to expect everyone to learn things that they're not proficient in. And with that, you can always find us on Slack with these handles. And these are also GitHub handles. The homepage README there will take you to a summary that has the links of just about everything I've talked about here, links to our subprojects, things of that nature. And then, of course, our Contribex mailing list, which has the asynchronous forms of communication. And with that, thank you for joining us. Bob, any last words?
Oh, thank you.
We'll see you all out there. And then hopefully we'll see you all at a real KubeCon, a real physical KubeCon eventually. Stay safe, everyone. Thank you.